trying to figure out how to explain this without sounding dramatic, but I honestly think that A2 might be the safest way to step outside your comfort zone through language. And that spills into the rest of your life because at this level, nothing is on the line. You're not supposed to be smooth. You're not supposed to be impressive. Demetrio gets to try things and fail things without any meaning anything. And this works even if you barely know the language yet. And somehow, that's exactly why it works. Because A2 gives you a second identity. So there's something weirdly liberating about having a second name. Because I didn't expect this the first time somebody called me Demetrio. Yeah, that's like my Spanish name. When I was working with some of my Colombian coworkers at my first job, and I thought they were just joking around, but they had never once called me Demetrius, and I was like, okay, I accept it. And the more I heard it, the more it stuck. And what surprised me wasn't just the novelty of being called something new. It was what unlocked in my brain. Demetrio got to be a different version of me, one with a little less baggage and a lot more permission to mess up. In my normal life, I'm supposed to have all the answers. I'm supposed to know what I'm doing. But Demetrio, he gets to ask all the dumb questions. He gets to pause, laugh at his mistakes, and just see what happens. So if something comes out wrong or if I sound goofy, it's not embarrassing. It's expected. And that's not failure. That's freedom. It's what A2 is about. It's the place in our language journey where this kind of freedom is not just allowed, but built in. You're supposed to be unfinished. You're supposed to make mistakes. The pressure to impress anyone just doesn't exist. And that's the best part, is the sense of permission just doesn't live in the language classroom. It spills into everything else. When you see that you can be Demetrio and survive, you realize that you can just loosen up in other parts of your life too. The problem most people run into is that they're way too attached to their main identity. They don't want to look foolish or weak, so they just never give themselves a real shot at starting over, even in something as low risk as learning language. But at the A2 level, it's kind of like a sandbox for your identity, a safe space where you get to experiment without real consequences. And that's why I treat language as a low risk identity sandbox, pretty much, inside of the language operating system. You get to practice confidence before you ever need to perform. And look, you might be thinking, isn't it fake to have a second identity? Won't people think I'm weird for using a different name or acting differently? And the truth is that nobody cares. In fact, people love it when you try and lean into it. It's kind of endearing and it shows courage, not deception. So the real fake thing is pretending that you're perfect from day one, and that's what keeps people stuck. So at A2, being unfinished is kind of the point. It's your chance to be a little less careful, a little more playful, and a lot more free. So when you let yourself step into that new identity, even if it's just for a few minutes a day, you start to realize that failure doesn't actually hurt you. In fact, it's the gateway to everything good that comes with language learning. So connection comes before fluency. Most people think the only way to connect with others in a new language is to first become fluent, master grammar, build a huge vocabulary and iron out your accent. But the truth is that connection comes way, way before fluency. In fact, waiting for fluency is the fastest way to never connect at all. I learned this the slow way. Early on, I assumed I had to be perfect to be understood and liked. And I would rehearse lines in my head and worry about forgetting a word and basically treat every conversation like it's a test. But what actually made things click the moment I started to relax in Spanish lessons. I had nothing to do with grammar, drills, or vocabulary lists, and it came from exposure. It came from just showing up again and again, even if I felt unfinished. I started watching childhood shows dubbed in Spanish, like Backyardigans, Magic School Bus, and I even watched a little bit of Bluey, okay, so don't judge me. But rereading simple stories or letting Spanish podcasts play in the background while I just did something else. I wasn't working at the language. I was just soaking it in over time, and I noticed that being around the language made it feel less foreign and more like a place I can actually visit. So I got used to the rhythms, the sounds, and even making mistakes. By the time I was in real lessons, I could just laugh off my errors and just focus on understanding, not performing. So here's the thing. Connection only happens when you're present, curious, and willing to look a little unfinished. So you don't have to be a master. You have to be willing to show up, even when you're not polished. It's about being comfortable with being seen as a learner. That comfort doesn't come from knowing every single rule. It comes from familiarity, from exposure, from not running away, even when things feel like a little awkward. There's tons of research showing that familiarity breeds comfort, and it's what lets real connection happen. So you don't need to impress people with perfect grammar. You need to be real and interested, even if your sentences are basic. But what if I can't say enough to really connect? You might ask. So the truth is, most people aren't listening for perfection. They're looking for effort and presence. They appreciate when you try, even if it's a little messy. And if you're worried that grammar is the key to comfort, ask yourself, did you need perfect grammar to connect as a kid? You learn by doing, by listening, by showing up over and over. So here's the takeaway. Connection is the starting line, not the finish line. So do not wait until you're fluent. Just put yourself out there. Start small, show up, be curious, and just let yourself be unfinished. That's where real comfort and real connection begins. So when I first started learning Spanish, I had this idea that A2 was going to be the slowest, most grueling phase. Everyone online seems, to either breeze past it or treat it like a necessary evil or hurdle that you have to clear before the real fun of language learning started. I got in my head that it's the most boring, patronizing shit, slogging through basic grammar and dialogues, waiting for some magical moment when everything would click. So I'll be honest, that mindset almost made it a self-fulfilling prophecy. I started and stopped A2 more times than I can count. Every time it was because I turned the whole thing to work. Honestly, I try to optimize every step, track my progress in spreadsheets, set rigid goals for how much vocabulary I memorize each week. I was so focused on just getting through A2 that I forgot to actually experience it. And every single time I burned out. The language stopped feeling like an adventure and started to feel like homework. But then, almost by accident, I let myself have fun. I started watching old shows dubbed in Spanish just for the nostalgia. I let myself coast, just no pressure, no timers, and whatever felt good in the moment. I stopped trying to optimize and just let the language be background noise. And that's honestly when everything changed. The time at A2 didn't fly by. It actually started preparing me for what came next. When I finally made the leap to real speaking lessons, I braced myself for a struggle. I expected to spend weeks stuck on grammar, rehearsing awkward sentences, and feeling like a fraud, but my teacher surprised me. After a few minutes, he just said, you're good. We can keep on building sentences. And I thought we'd be stuck on the basics forever, but we weren't. I realized I had been absorbing way more than I thought, just by letting myself enjoy the process. The wildest thing is I don't even know grammar rules in English half the time. So I didn't learn English by memorizing theory. I learned it by using it. So that's what's backwards about most language teaching. We start with the parts and then the theory. We're trying to teach someone how to ride a bike by making them memorize the names of every part of the bike before they even touch it. So you don't learn motion by talking about it. You learn motion by moving. A2 is where you're supposed to say, it is what it is, so that doesn't drain you. The mental bandwidth it takes is surprisingly low. I found I can keep moving, keep training at the gym, keep on working, keep hanging out with friends, dating, learning other things in Spanish. None of it got in the way. It energized me, gave me a place to stay, a place to experiment, to be unfinished without it costing me anything. That's what made it such a powerful vessel, not just for language, but for becoming more comfortable in my own skin. That's why I believe that A2 is the safest way to just step outside your comfort zone. You're not really risking anything. You're allowed to be new, to try things and fail, and to ask dumb questions, to laugh at yourself. And when you give yourself that permission in one area, it starts to bleed into just everything else. You realize you don't have to be perfect to belong. You just have to show up. If you want to put this into practice, here's your action step. Later today, pick a name for yourself in your target language, okay? Just write it down once, say it out loud, and that's it. Just move on. It might feel a little weird or a little stupid, but trust me, surprisingly powerful. And just giving yourself a new name is like handing yourself a permission slip to be unfinished, to experiment, to play, to have fun. It's just a small gesture. It plants that seed that every time you see that name, you're reminding yourself that they're allowed to be a beginner, and that being a beginner can be fun. So A2 isn't small. It's the beginning of something big. It's your safe space to try, fail, connect, and grow. Not just in the language, but everywhere else. When you treat it that way, you realize that stepping outside your comfort zone doesn't have to be scary. It can actually be the safest, most energizing thing that you can do. I don't want to be 100 different things. I just want one vessel that translates to everywhere. And for me, that vessel is learning Spanish. For you, it might be another language. But the real value isn't fluency. It's what happens when you give yourself a safe place to try, to fail, and connect. A2 isn't small. It's just the beginning of that. By the way, no pressure, but there's a link underneath this video where you can have a look at my paid programs. When you trust me enough and feel like my free content has changed your life, you can have a look at that.